Welcome and welcome back to the Daily Report. This is the Marketplace, and in our Marketplace tonight, we have the acting CEO of the Financial Inclusion Fund, Elizabeth Nkuku, who will be telling us how exactly the Hustler Fund has been faring on. Have you been receiving your Hustler Funds? How have you been receiving your Hustler Funds? Just recently, it hit about a year. In November of last year, Hustler Fund was 1 year old. And you're getting your PhD in finance. Elizabeth, welcome to TV47.
Thank you so much for having me.
What is the math feeling like now that Hustler Fund is a year and a few months old?
I think the Hustler Fund being 1 year old and growing strong, it's one of the best feeling, actually being given the opportunity to serve in that particular fund.
Right.
We have, numbers are growing. Mm-hmm. We continue to see people borrowing. We continue to see people repaying. So with the largest impact really being on the young people, we have over 70% of the Hustler Fund being serving the people below the age of 40.
All right.
And maybe to the conversation that we were having, even about, I would say, 40% below the age of 30.
All right.
So it's really serving the purpose of which maybe the president was looking at. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's been a good ride so far.
And it's fantastic because TV47 is also quite young, in the media scene, and we are one of the fastest growing media stations. And one would say that about the Hustler Fund as well, considering it is one of the cheapest digital loans, and it requires, no collateral at all from the people who are accessing it. How has it been that you have been giving all this money? How are people treating the Hustler Fund?
When you look at the people who really needed this money, there are people who could not get collateral, or if they needed to get any funding, they had to go to people who are taking advantage of them. You are being charged over 10% per day. That is a huge amount of interest that you end up seeing that you could have reinvested in your business. So with the Hustler coming in, whereby you are being charged 8% per annum, and if you pay within the day, you actually don't pay any interest. People have taken advantage of that, and they have actually grown their business. They're very good success stories whereby you see someone borrowed 500 shillings. They have, like the shoe shiners, once they buy the kiwi, they have that for 3-4 days.
Right.
So that is an amazing story. They couldn't have gotten that any other way, other than the fact that they got that from the Hustler Fund.
Right. And before we even start to delve into the numbers even deeper, maybe if you could just tell us, it is, financial inclusion means that you are trying to net in the people who are usually left out when seeking finances for their businesses. These are the women, the youth. Could you maybe just categorize into percentages how many women are accessing the Hustler Fund?
The way the Hustler Fund is, it actually cuts across everybody. So no gender specific. So as we speak right now, about 48% of the borrowers in the Hustler Fund are women.
Right.
And in terms of even economic empowerment, we have another 50%, it's almost 50% people using the smartphone people using the feature phone. So one thing about the Hustler Fund, it has not discriminated anyone, whether you are in which economic status or your gender. If you look at the regional distribution, every single county actually have a representation of someone who has borrowed. So the Hustler Fund has been able to do what financial inclusion is, which is increased accessibility at an affordable price, and even the chunky levels whereby I only need 500 shillings today because I didn't get kibarua. So that helps you to see at next day. So that is what the Hustler Fund was supposed to do.
Right, let's just look at some of our facts here about the Hustler Fund. And we're just going to be tallying and getting the numbers and our facts straight. The loan facility is meant to cater for hustlers, quote unquote, and MSMEs. Those are micro, small, and medium enterprises. And the loan facility is accessed through a USSD code. Now, of course, there is the logic behind it. *254#. The USSD code does bring in a lot of the informal sector. What was, your reaction? What was the reaction of Kenyans when they knew that they could access it through this USSD code?
The beauty about the USSD code, it means that you're not being discriminated from accessing the funds based on what fund you're using. So even a kabambe, just the normal feature phone, you can actually be able to achieve this. So this brings a lot of excitement because no matter where I am, as long as I have a phone, I have an ID first, I have a phone, and I'm in this country, then I can be able to access that. So that is a huge, huge thing for us.
All right. Now, the interest rate stands at around 8% annually. That is calculated daily at 0.02%. One would say that this number, of course, is more inclusive for the people who want, cheaper loans, give or take. However, 8%, what is the validity? Is, now that you have already rolled it out for a year plus, is it giving, the returns that you were expecting as the government?
So when you look at the Hustler Fund, it is not a commercial product. It is an enabling product.
All right.
So what we are supposed to do as government is to help people get into a place where they can be able to actually get commercial products. So this is to build people. So the reason why 8% works, it's because we are not doing this to make money as government. We are doing this to enable people make money eventually. And you see, that is what the governments are there for. If someone can be able to access a bank loan, then that is not necessarily the client of the Hustler Fund.
Right.
The Hustler Fund is looking for someone who, if they went to the bank will tell them, okay, you don't have any collateral, I have no history of who you are, so I will not be able to do it. So 8% is really to take care, to make sure that the fund is self-sustaining,
right,
so that we don't have to go to National Treasury to ask for money for sustenance. Yes.
Now that you've mentioned, Elizabeth, that of course there's no commercialization of the Hustler Fund, there are people who commercialize loaning, especially financial institutions such as banks. 8% is actually quite a low figure. Now, the Monetary Policy Committee has already changed the base rate. Now we're almost 15%, the base rate, and that forces a lot of banks to change their rates. Do you believe that this maybe is taking them out of business?
We are in different, we're playing in the different sectors. If you look at someone who is, I go back again to the shoe shiner, when those people walk to a bank, they will not have anything for them to be lent on. They don't have bank statements that someone can analyze. They do not have any collateral to give to the bank. So what the bank, we're actually complementing the bank. Right. So for us, we are coming in and giving this startup capital to this individual who could not get it. Once they have their own financial statements, they can be not. They can actually have a historical, that's a history of finances that someone can be able to review and lend. We actually see the bank saying, you know what, can I be able to take your good customers and lend to them? So you're not competing; you're actually complementing each other. Yeah.
And of course, we will be delving into the credit score system that the government is trying to start with this particular Hustler Fund. Now calculated daily at 0.02%, that is quite competitive. You have said, of course, that you're not necessarily in competition with the banks. What is the loan limit given to an individual in the Hustler Fund?
So the Hustler Fund was to help people come up with the right culture in terms of investments.
All right.
And I will take you back. When we started, maybe when some of us were in school, we knew about simple interest, compound interest, but neither did we relate that to the quality of life that we'll end up living. So when you look at that, this 2%, if someone can be able to borrow at 2%, it means that if they make a 10% return for that particular day, they have about a 9.8% to go home with. Right. Compared to where they were, where maybe they were getting money from Shylocks, by the time you are making money to take to your kids, it means that 10% has been taken. So I get 1,000. By the time I'm breaking even, 100 shillings I've already paid to the financier. What does that mean? Most probably, I will continue in this cycle because I cannot be able to create capital.
Right.
So what the Hustler Fund is doing is helping you create capital. And look at it in terms of, if I am able to put this money in, I'm able to take this money out, some of it, and invest it. And actually, one of the features of the Hustler Fund is the 5% deduction. You can actually be able to lend to the government as an individual. So you see what the Hustler Fund is. It's not only giving you lending power, it's also giving you a better life when you retire.
All right. Yeah. Now, there's, of course, the saving aspect. Around 5%, is deducted whenever an individual takes up the Hustler Fund. How much do we have when it comes to savings as a country through the Hustler Fund, jointly?
We are at about close to 3 billion. We are
nice.
we are over 2.9 billion. 2.9 billion. So we're just close to 3 billion.
Right.
And maybe to speak about that, we have the 5% that is deducted at source. I borrow 500 shillings. I get 475 shillings into my account. So what the government had said is that for the amount of money that you will have saved, I will match you. For every 2 shillings you've saved, in the long term, I'll give you 1 shilling.
Right.
During the anniversary, they made good that, and they actually sent money in. So for everybody who had borrowed more than 5 times, the government made good, and they gave them the 2 shillings for 1.
Right.
Yeah.
And that makes for a very good investment. If at the end of the year, I can cash out that amount. And it's right here. There's a 5% deduction on each borrowing. And of course, the fund aims to incorporate a saving culture, which, by the way, the government or the president, Dr. William Ruto, was very adamant about. And he said that as a country, even our debt, in accordance to the amount we have as a country is quite wanting. It incorporates a saving culture, and borrowers have been promised in the last year when, the Hustler Fund timed won a 12% dividend every 31st of December. Have borrowers access to this money?
Yes. So the way the structure of the fund is, we have the 5%. The 5% is split into 2. 30% short-term, whereby it means that I can now easily access my funds,
right.
And then the 70%.
Right.
So the money that has been saved on the 30%, from the anniversary date, someone can be able to access that. Not only that, someone who has been saving, because we have what is called a voluntary savings portion. If I get a nice deal, I can be able to save using the Hustler Fund,
right.
And the day I need that money, I will actually get it back.
Right.
And not only the money that I put in there, I will get an interest rate. So when the president was speaking about the 12%,
right.
Remember it is pegged on T-bill. At that particular point, Treasury bill was about 15. So when we're talking about Treasury bill at about 16, 17%, going forward, even the interest rate will be better.
Right.
So we have the way the returns of the Hustler funds will be, they'll be pegged on the Treasury bill rate.
Right.
So for me to invest in the Treasury bill, I need 100,000. But now today, with my 25 shillings, with my 100 shillings, through the Hustler Fund, I can get a return similar to the Treasury bill.
Right, and of course, there is a portion that goes into your long-term savings, right? And Elizabeth, I'm seeing that, of course, you have a lot of experience in the financial service sector, especially when it comes to management in the pension and personal wealth creation program. When it comes to the long-term view, when you're looking at the ordinary Kenyan, you have said, the shoe shiner, you have a few shillings here, 100 shillings, you put into your savings so that you can get it at the end of, give 20, 30 years. How does the pension aspect of the Hustler Fund work?
So it's actually 70% of the mandatory savings, and you can choose that even my short term, I want to put it onto the long term. So this is one of the things that His Excellency has been talking about. We need to increase the savings culture because we don't want old age poverty. You can always be young without money, but getting old without money, that is something else.
Right.
So what the 70% does is that you will access the funds after you turn 60.
All right.
So after you turn 60, you can be able to access your funds plus all the accumulated savings. However, we also realize that our population is also young. So some of them telling them to wait until when they are 60, that is another problem, and maybe they're in business. So they will require capital. So every 5 years, you can actually be able to access 30% of your long-term savings because we believe that you're accumulating capital. So when you have accumulated capital, you need to do something big, you can actually be able to access that.
Right.
So, but once you turn 60 years, your funds becomes, all of them are lumped into the short term. So because at that particular point, you might need the money to survive on.
All right.
Yeah.
In the current day and age, a lot of the youth, they usually say that this generation is live fast, die young. We want to get it right now, right at this instant. We are a very quick fix type of generation. How do you find it trying to convince this particular generation to, wait until, the pension years, the old age, so that they can access these funds?
I think most of them have looked at the 5%. Again, this is according to how I look at it. Most of them are looking at that 5% as a transactional cost. So you're actually surprising them when you tell them you can withdraw and this is your money. So it's educating them and telling them, yes, this money is being put onto the long term. But when you look at it, if I was going to get money from any of the digital lenders, that 5% becomes like a transaction cost.
Right.
So I think most of them have normalized that. But one of the key things that we are embarking on is really financial literacy training.
Right.
Just telling someone, how can you use this money? How can you use this fund to grow your money? So that will be really some of the conversations that we'll be pushing and pushing to the young people and everybody really in the fund. Yeah.
Before we go into the credit scoring system, let's look at the numbers now. The Hustler Fund. How much has been disbursed, Elizabeth? How much has been returned, back by borrowers? How much do we have as a country when it comes to the Hustler Fund in accordance to the amount that the government has, put aside? And how much do we, project to have in the financial budget 2024-2025?
Thank you. In terms of how much has been disbursed, we're just getting to 50 billion. And in terms of repayment, we're at about 39 billion. So the repayment is pretty decent. And that gives us a loan portfolio of about 13 billion. So in this financial year, we are going to be getting 5 billion, additional 5 billion, and even in the next financial year. So the government is still committed, very committed to actually growing the hustler person. And now we have sieved through.
Right.
And we can actually see people who are running businesses. So some of the limits are increasing for people who have done well. And so that's why even the government is pumping in more money for us to be able to fund the businesses that people have started. All
right, let's just look at those numbers a little bit. We've, of course, gotten this from the Hustler Fund site. The amount that has been disbursed is around 36,873,121,130. And this is as at this afternoon. The savings account is at 1,843,656,056 shillings. So you as a Kenyan, if you have been borrowing, if you're a repeat borrower, you've helped the entire country save about 1 billion Kenyan shillings. So you do have the capability of saving. Registration is at 21,245,811 and the active borrowers are 19 million plus. Now, Elizabeth, we're seeing a discrepancy or a difference between the people who have registered and the active borrowers, give or take around 3 million, 2 million, give or take. Why do you think this is?
Naturally, people are curious. So there are people who are curious to see, does this thing work? So they registered and they didn't borrow. We are also seeing people who are using this as a savings platform. So the difference would also be someone who just logged in, who subscribed, but instead of borrowing, they're actually saving. So the voluntary saving is also taking a lot of, is picking up. And those are some of the reasons why we have differences in those numbers. So the number of people who have borrowed about 19 million, but the true subscribers are actually higher than that, is about 22 million.
All right, it's already hit 22 million.
Yes.
That's interesting. Now, the payback rate is at 28 billion. The difference is quite large in comparison to, a borrowing of 36 billion. Why do you think this is?
So our average repayment rate is about 73%, which by any means it's very decent for people who are running digital products. So what then we are doing is really to show people, why should I pay this? Why should I pay back even for the 30%? Because at the end of the day, I need to grow my credit. I need to grow my ability to access credit. So. And some of the reasons why people should really repay is because the more I repay, the higher the credit I can access. So I'll give you an example. For the personal loan product, we have people whose limits are all the way to 50,000. How did they get to the 50,000? It is because they were started maybe with 3,000. They have borrowed more than 1,000 times. So it means that their savings are huge. And for anyone who has saved, we actually get, your limit is determined by two things: what you got initially, and the number of times that you've borrowed. But still, if you've saved more, you actually get 2 times your savings. So, of your short-term savings. So you can actually imagine, for someone who have saved a lot, they can actually get their limits all the way to 50,000. So one of the reasons that people should continue borrowing and repaying is because their limits are going to increase. And as we shall be discussing the credit score, also your credit score improves and you'll be able to even go to the banks and borrow. So those are some of the key things that we need as a country to realize that, if I repay my loan, I'm increasing my chances. And at the same time, I'm able to get the money anyway. So there's no point of being a defaulter because you can still access the same money.
Right.
And you're in a better position.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, when you think of the possible consequences, before we even go for a very short break, when you think of the possible consequences, we've concentrated, I believe, a little bit too much on the positive aspects and some of the benefits you can get. How about, what are the punishments for people who do not pay back?
So one of the things that you're thinking, as we grow as a country, we need to create some sort of financial discipline. One of the ways to do that is to quantify it. How do you quantify the fact that you're a better person compared to me? We need to give it a score. We need to give it a number. So one of the things that we are going to do, and we are going to roll it out, is creating a score that can tell you, you know what, if you're going to come and rent my house, let me see your Hustler Fund statement. Let me see your Hustler Fund score. Because if you can't pay Hustler Fund, which is maybe 5,000, 6,000, what does it mean about my rent?
All right.
Yeah.
So there are long-term consequences to the actions that you take as a Kenyan. And of course, your borrowing. This will have an impact in your future life. And we will be delving into that a little bit more after this break.
Na safari hii katika Mfahamu Kiongozi tutakuletea viongozi aina mbalimbali.
Nikuwe na Nisani kama 10 na pia nikuwe menua minibus. Minibus nikoniwa.
Kushinda unaangalia simu ya mzee. Soma Biblia ama ingia kwa washroom ujisugue. Mpaka nimetoa hivi.
I don't know whether any of my children would want to get into the political field. Sijajua bado.
Kila Alhamisi saa 1:30 kuendelea.
Join us on a journey.
Welcome back to the marketplace. Did you know that the Hustler Fund that you have been taking, the borrowing that you have been taking from the government, could have long-term consequences if you do not pay it back? We're having a conversation with the acting CEO of the Financial Inclusion Fund, Elizabeth Nkuku, who is telling us what are the possible, reprimands. Could we say you're being reprimanded?
We are making you a better person.
You will be made, a better person when it comes to the Hustler Fund. We will be having the credit score system. Let's just look at the possible consequences of not paying back your loan in the Hustler Fund. What do you think will happen to the almost 30%? You've said 73%, so it's about 27% Kenyans who have not paid back.
So, when most of us think about the CRB, it brings a negative connotation because the first way it was done is that I have been listed so I can get funding.
Right.
So the Hustler Fund came to correct that so that we are helping you become or reclaim your right position.
Right.
Because maybe at times when you started off, you had not thought about what does this mean for me? So what the Hustler Fund is doing is that it's giving you a starting point.
Right.
I will borrow this 500 shillings, this 50,000 shillings, I'll do something with it, and then I'll be able to pay back. So in essence, you shall be able to query and say, what kind of person is this? How can they do they really honor their obligations?
All right.
So the credit score will start from what we have seen within the Hustler Fund, because you have sufficient data.
Right.
For us to be able to tell what kind of person you are, can you be trusted, and all that. So essentially, the second step will be, once you already have created the score, it is to go to the financial institutions and ask them, can you please look at this person even as you try to actually give them funding?
Right.
And also, to even grow this further, I think in the more developed markets, you'll have that even before you get your rental, you're looking for a house, you're looking for any funding, you actually we need to see what score you have. So eventually we shall grow this so that it has more comprehensive review, so that you are not looking only at the Hustler Fund, but how else do we put in other people? Because at the end of the day, it is giving people a chance to be gauged on the behavior that they have.
Right.
at times, when you think about it, some of us don't come from very well-off family, so we might not have the titles to give to the banks as collateral.
Right.
So you have to restart our lives. So the scoring system will help you restart your life, help you become a better person. But one of the things that we'll do, even as we roll it out, we will really communicate to people, train them, and tell them why this is important for them.
Right.
It's not a punishment.
Right.
It is just helping you.
Right. I believe as a country, through the Hustler Fund, we are getting financial discipline, whether you like it or not, a lot of people would say. And around 3 million people were, pardoned from the CRB when, the Hustler Fund was rolled out. And would you say that, a large number of these people came into the Hustler Fund? Do you believe that over time now they're learning financial discipline? Because this is essentially, what the Hustler Fund is aiming for.
So ideally, that was what we needed to do. We are still carrying out that statistics to make sure that we can put a number to it. But the answer is yes. If you look at the number of repeat borrowers, we have 8 million repeat borrowers. These people, in one or another, some of them were in CRB, and they could not be able to access funding. So with the Hustler Fund, it gives them a starting point again, a fresh start. And just looking at how the credit limits of some of the people have grown, and maybe just to mention that as at the date of the anniversary, the limits of more than 2 million Kenyans was enhanced.
Right.
So with such a huge number, then we continue to do that every 4 months. So we will actually continue to see people's businesses grow, and that helps you actually even become a better, in terms of your financial position, is much, much better.
Right, and even looking at the statistics, the unique cases, people who have borrowed over 1,000 times, adjusting their borrowing rates, to that effect is about 4.5 million Kenyans. You're saying that about 2 million Kenyans were moved up. What about the 2.5 million?
Okay, the way we looked at the increases, we looked at anyone who had borrowed more than 5 times. So we had a lot of people who had borrowed more than that times, these are more than 2 million. Then the people who between twice and 5 times then fall under that. Those are the people who had borrowed 2 to 5 times.
Right.
But remember, we are saying that if you're a true hustler, at that particular point, things change.
Right.
Anyone who had borrowed more than 5 times is really the person who was looking for this fund too. And that's why the limits were increased for them.
All right.
Yeah.
And the long-term view is that the credit score system will be used even by financial institutions.
Yes.
A way in which, a lot of Kenyans could gain borrowing from financial institutions without the need of collateral. Tentatively, when do you think this will happen, considering that, out of about 50 million Kenyans, the registrations is still not even half of that. When will we use this database to have a credit score system?
Actually, the work is already ongoing. So what is going to happen is that maybe in the next couple of months, we will finish that. And then we have to do massive education.
Right.
Because it's not good to start telling, you cannot access you cannot access loans from the banks because you have defaulted on this and this is your credit score.
Right.
What we will do is really, once we already have the score, we do a countrywide explanation of how this is going to be executed.
Right.
So give or take, in the next six to 12 months, we should be able to roll out that.
So in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yes, all factors help us.
Give or take. You heard it here first on TV47. The credit score system, which the government had placed a major pillar of its growth strategy in ensuring that there is financial inclusion, would be rolled out in the next 6 or 12 months. Now there is a very, now that it's Ramadan, it's good to bring these things to light. There is the demographic that has probably not been served by the Hustler Fund, considering, it has an interest rate. 8% is, one would say, marginal. But for Muslims, 8% you cannot even take. How exactly are you planning to incorporate the Islamic community?
So what we have done is we have reached out to people offering the Islamic products. And one of the things is, how do we craft it? Because if you look at the 8%, it's an interest rate in the conventional world, but it's really the expense that you are taking to run the fund.
Right.
So we need to take it through the Sharia compliance route so that we can be able to see how do we factor that in. So the work also has begun, and we should be able, hopefully before we go to the second anniversary, we should have something that speaks to that community.
All right, so before the second anniversary, that will be November of 2024. We're getting a lot of dates here. Before November or during or when? November 2024?
Yes.
By November 2024, there would be a loan facility for Muslims. Let's go to the Vikundi figures, right? The grouping figures. This was, you know, the second stage of the Hustler Fund, catering to groups. You could be grouped in a group of 5 to 10 people. You could access this loan. It does have a higher limit, considering you are catering to larger groups. Now, the registered groups, as at this afternoon, when I checked, you know, the Hustler Fund platform, was 51,860, and the total number of members is about 1,182,390. The amount disbursed stands at around 163,974,753, and the savings in Vikundi, which is usually the 5%, is at about 8 million shillings. Are these numbers, you know, do they ring a bell to you?
Yes, they do. And one of the things that we are looking at, the uptake of this, we had thought would be better than we have seen.
Right.
We have already, I think we are already 9 months since we launched this product. And one of the things that we are asking ourselves, why is the growth not as good as we had envisioned?
Right.
And one of the things that we are noting is that we need to educate people more, because again, remember, our minimum groups are 10.
Right.
So maybe the journey of registration could be putting away some people. So what we are doing, and that is as soon as even this coming quarter,
Right.
is that we will do what is aided registration.
Right.
So that you already are in a chama. How do we make sure that your group is actually onboarded as fast as possible? Because you can imagine someone who is maybe not very
Conversant with
the process, they can actually, and you have to have 10 people who are conversant with the process. So we are thinking maybe that is one of the problems that we are facing. So we are actually taking a different route, whereby we shall actually go to the markets, help people register. Then we know you people around you, so you can get into the groups together.
Right.
So the aim of the groups was really to, one, increase the credit limits, and also make people be accountable for each other.
Right.
So with that, you know, like the way the product is that if I'm a good payer and I have a limit of X, for anyone that is in that group, I contribute 3 times that. So if, for example, my limit is 3,000, I get into a group, actually my contribution to that group is 9,000.
Right.
So you see, essentially, you are able to get higher limits, and that is one of the ways we are seeking to grow the limits.
Right. So even with, you know, higher borrowing limits, you're seeing that a lot of individuals are not getting into this particular, you know, portion of the Hustler Fund. Would you say then maybe that 10 is quite an ambitious number? Should it be reduced?
What you have to balance, because also you do not want to see people in a bar getting together and getting into a kikundi and borrowing. So you have to do a lot of balances. Remember, this is supposed to change the way people's lives. So that's why we are saying it is better to go the aided way, whereby we are going to the markets and helping you register, because if the process is what is a little bit challenging, because maybe you do not understand the steps and the hoops of how to go about it, it's better to cure the process, as opposed to reducing the numbers, because remember, the numbers were to take care of serious business people.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And according to our understanding, this could be borrowed not only through the USSD number, but also through SACCOs. And this is a way in which, you know, the Hustler Fund is trying to incorporate more financial institutions. First of all, was it a success, you know, incorporating SACCOs into helping people borrow through the Hustler Fund?
Yes, it is. And because you already have vetted people. But remember, again, there is the person who, if you're already banked by a SACCO, most probably you are taking this as an additional capital. So remember, the Hustler Fund still wants to go to the individual. So that's why we are looking at smaller groups. And that's why also training is becoming one of the key things, because we want the Shushaina who has not been in a cooperative to actually join and be cleaned, so that the SACCO can be able to uplift them. So what we are seeing is that the SACCOs will actually help in terms of increasing the limits by even being able to lend their own money.
Right.
Yeah.
And that would help in incorporating, these financial institutions. And I'm glad that we're in agreement that this number is quite dismal if you compare it to, the personal funds that people usually take, because that is in the hundreds, it's in the billions.
Yeah.
And now we're looking at 163 million. It's quite dismal. Now that we know that this number is not where exactly we're aiming for, one of the incentives is, of course, increasing limits, trying to lure people by saying you can get more money. What other incentives have you put in place?
Actually, you see, first of all, you have to ask yourself, why are you here? So for us, one of the key things is really that thing of people just being put away by the process because the process seems long. So that is what we are curing, communicating, training, and helping them do that. Because you see, you have to be registered by MSEA.
Right.
MSEA is the Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises Authority. So and then telling them why is it important to be registered under that authority. It is because with that certificate, you can actually do business with anyone. When it comes to government, you will actually get allocated for business from there.
Right.
So one of the things that I think we should do better is communicate and tell people why it is important to go through this process, because it looks long, but it is an advantage at the end of it all, because your business opportunities are more, you are better, you are more formalized, and you're better trained.
Right.
Yeah.
When it comes to the Vikundi, this portion of the Hustler Fund, what would you say is the default rate?
Actually, the default rate at the Vikundi level is much lower compared to, I would say the repayment is almost like 80% because, again, of the individual guarantees, and that is what we wanted to ride on. Yeah.
And when it comes to the default rate, having a group of 10 people could prove, a bit difficult for the individuals to ensure that other people within the group do pay. What are the possible consequences for individuals and groups that default?
So you see, for the group that defaults, again, this is a self-checking mechanism. If I'm in a group that has defaulted, I can't even get my personal loan. So we have to make sure, so that's why the default rate at the group level is actually much lower, because we are all pushing you to pay so that we are better. And then remember, you can actually pay for each other. So worst case scenario, I want to borrow from my personal loan, and you have defaulted and in the same group, then people can pay for each other.
Right.
Yeah.
And what is the projection now that, the numbers are quite, dismal, given the next year or so, a few months from now, how many more people do you think, how many more Vikundis will we be having, taking up the Hustler Fund? What are your goals?
So our goals are at least to double that 51,000, and again, make sure that as we increase the limits of the groups increase. So on average, maybe get to anything close to 2 billion. That would be what success would look like, at least in the next 3 to 4 months.
Right. Now, the Kenya Development, Kenya Development Corporation recently, rolled out a fund that is quite similar to the Hustler Fund called the Safer Fund. It also provides almost a single-digit loan, double-digit, almost 10%. Catering for the same, group MSMEs, catering for the same people, the hustlers. Do you believe that, A, this could be, it could be mimicking the Hustler Fund, and B, what makes the Hustler Fund unique from other funds given by the government?
I think I'll start with the latter. The main thing that the Hustler Fund is different is because of the digital lending. The fact that everything is on your phone, and also the fact that we have reached almost everybody without really now having to speak to anyone. So that digitization helps. But in terms of each of these funds are very unique and look at very specific needs. So when you think about maybe something like the youth fund, they look at the youth only, and their limits are higher.
Right.
So if you look at the Hustler Fund, it's supposed to help sieve. And anyone who is doing better, let's say like the one that's focusing on the MSMEs, so they will be graduated. We shall be graduating people from the Hustler Fund to some of those funds. So that is really the role of the Hustler Fund. Yeah.
So it's a means of graduating people
and
to the next step.
Yes.
You can borrow around 5,000 shillings to 500 to 5,000 shillings, 10,000 shillings from the Hustler Fund, and once you have the capability, you can be moved to an even higher ground. Now let's talk counties. Different counties has different borrowers. The mannerism is different. You're building up a database for the credit score system. Which are the highest borrowing and highest repaying counties? Who are the people that people should be looking up to?
It's interesting that the correlation between the people borrowing and repaying, they're actually at par. The people who are borrowing more are the same people that are really repaying. So some of the counties that are doing well are counties around Central. I think Nyeri is the best performing. Then we have Kiambu, we have Nairobi, and Rift Valley and Western, so really diverse. And I think the ones that are really not maybe doing well, I would go back again to maybe what you're challenging us about the Sharia compliance, because also maybe does not speak to their faith, so that could be one of the challenges. So we need to create a product that speaks to them. So for most people with a good economic activity, they are able to borrow and repay. Right. Yeah.
So Central is doing quite well. Even, the Western region and the Rift Valley region, when it comes to borrowing, when it comes to repayment, is it the same?
Same.
The same.
It's very similar. It's very correlated, because the people who are borrowing more, remember, they're the ones who are coming and repaying, because you cannot borrow if you're not repaying. Right. So they're very correlated. Yeah.
And looking at the expansion of the Hustler Fund, we started with personal and individual borrowing, and then now we have the Vikundi, where you can borrow in groups. So what is the next step for the Hustler Fund?
So we are looking at the MSME loans, and one of the things that we did is that everybody can come in and get a personal loan product. However, as you grow, we want to help you formalize your business. So that is the second level, whereby we have actually at the final stages of integrating with BRS, the Business Registration Services, so that for me to be able to give you more money, I'd rather know where you are formally constituted. So that is what we are doing. Then once we do that, the second level the now final stage will be to the startups. For the startups, you need a little bit more capital as compared to what you'd get from MSME. And at that particular point, we'll not even be looking at government maybe funding 100%. There are different ways in which businesses can fund their business. So is it then to get some people to give grants to these businesses or invest? And this is in tandem with what the Capital Markets Authority is doing. We have what is crowdfunding regulations. How can we graduate these people so that they can be able to fundraise anyway? So remember, we are growing them, but at the same time, we don't want to dump them. We want to make sure that when you get to the startup point, they can actually be able to source funding on their own. But there are regulators who are now working on that.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are, chances that in the next year or so, you would be having MSMEs who would be able. What would be the limit then?
So if you look at, by the time you're getting to the startup, it's actually not only a loan, it's also plus equity. So the way that world works, it's more of the private equity kind of world. And they will take a bet from 100,000 all the way to, I would say, hundreds of millions. And
this would in turn grow the activities within the Nairobi Stock Exchange.
Ideally, that is supposed to be the path. I'm helping you as Hustler Fund to make you a viable business. Then I'd graduate you. I can, at that particular point, someone is willing to give you some little capital for as a bank or any financial institutions. And then remember, at that particular point, I'm scaling. As I'm scaling, I need more equity, I need more longer term debt, better terms. So at that particular point, then how do you get into the Nairobi Securities Exchange? And does it mean that we start a Nairobi Securities Exchange for MSME? Some countries have done it. Yes.
And there were promises by some members of the current government who were saying that the Nairobi Securities Exchange will be the best performing bourse by the end of the year. It seemed quite ambitious, but clearly there are ways and means to get there.
We have a lot of privatizations that are going maybe to come through. So, and those are some of the things that will help at least uplift the Nairobi Securities Exchange. And as more companies come in, the better it is for everyone. Because competition also helps in terms of just bringing a lot of activities into anything that we get into. So you can imagine if we get private companies coming in, we get government companies coming in, we all grow the economy, we all grow the markets, we all grow wealth at the end of it.
And the more the money circulates, the more money that will be in your pockets.
Yes.
Where do you see, now that we are concluding this conversation, believe it or not, it's been an hour. Now that we're concluding this conversation, where is the future of Hustler Fund? Will we, go to a certain stage where we will no longer need the Hustler Fund? We will have transferred all the people to financial institutions. Is this, a baby that will grow and die and will have a natural cycle? What's the future of Hustler Fund?
It will be good if we can transfer everybody to the banking sector, but that is not possible.
Right.
So we shall continue to nurture new people. Remember, as we grow, there are people who will fall by their wayside. Remember, our role is to nurture. So these people will continue being there. So we'll continue cleaning them and telling them this is how you grow. So I don't see this being a short term. I see that this almost being like a calling whereby you have to come and clean people and upgrade them to the next level.
Right. Yeah. And for all the hustlers who are watching this right now, maybe there are some people who have had their own reservations about the Hustler Fund. What would you tell them?
You cannot benefit from that you don't try. So it is good to engage the process so that you can realize that this thing is working, and then also ask the people who have benefited from it. Because I think there is no better way of understanding what is going on other than trying the process. So my recommendation is try the process, be true to the process, pay when you have to pay, borrow when you must pay, you must borrow. Do not just borrow because the money is available.
Right, and at the risk of being repetitive, please do repeat the possible consequences of not repaying your debts on the Hustler Fund.
So what we are working on is on the scoring. So one of the time when all this is all rolled out, when you're going to be getting your bank loan, or when you're going to be getting your help loan, or when you're going to access your e-citizen or anything, that will be with your stamp of authority. This is the person I am.
Right.
So we shall educate people, even the people providing the services, so that they know if this person cannot pay Hustler Fund, they won't pay your rent.
Right. And that could even, affect the way you live, the quality of your life. We have been talking all matters Hustler Fund and the possibility of a credit score system. Did you know that maybe even in the next 12 or so months, the credit score that you have been building up within the Hustler Fund could either help you or even have, consequences on your life. This has been The Marketplace. Thank you so much for joining me. Our conversation with the acting CEO of the Financial Inclusion Fund, Elizabeth Nkuku, has been with us, telling us all about this particular fund. Have yourselves a very lovely night. Good night, and have yourselves a beautiful Wednesday night.
Na safari hii katika Mfahamu Kiongozi tutakuletea viongozi aina mbalimbali.
Nilikuwa na nisani kama 10.